The waitress shielded a terrified child from a screaming manager and lost her job for it. What she didn't know, the girl was the daughter of the city's most feared mafia boss. The next morning, he appeared at her door with an offer that would change everything. The lunch rush at Café Maravilla hit its peak at exactly 12:15, the kind of chaos that turned every second into a balancing act. Hannah Lee slid a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes onto table 7 with one hand, while refilling coffee at table 9 with the other, her muscles moving on autopilot, her mind already 3 steps ahead. The diner hummed with the clatter of silverware, the hiss of the grill, and the low murmur of regulars who came for the $6.99 blue plate special and stayed for the free refills. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their cracks patched with duct tape, and the air smelled like grease, burnt coffee, and decades of working-class hope. Hannah had been working at Café Maravilla for 18 months, ever since her mother's medical bills had devoured her savings and made luxuries like career planning feel like fairy tales. She had a business degree gathering dust in a drawer and student loans that didn't care she was earning $2.13 an hour plus tips. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could analyze profit margins and optimize supply chains, but she couldn't afford to fix the check engine light in her 10-year-old Honda. That's when she noticed the girl. She couldn't have been older than 10, sitting alone in the corner booth, booth number 3, the one by the window with the view of the parking lot. Her hands were folded tight in her lap, clutching a worn stuffed bear with one missing eye. Dark curls fell around a pale, heart-shaped face, and her eyes, wide and deep brown, stared at the tabletop like she was trying to will herself invisible. She wasn't crying, but Hannah could see the tremble in her small shoulders, the way her breath hitched every few seconds like she was holding something terrible inside. "Hey there, sweetheart," Hannah said softly, crouching down beside the booth so she was eye level with the girl. "Are you okay? Are you waiting for someone?" The girl nodded but didn't speak. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed bear. "That's okay. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." Hannah smiled gently. "How about some water? Maybe a hot chocolate?" Another nod. Still no words. Hannah was reaching for her order pad when she heard the sharp stomp of boots on linoleum. Heavy, deliberate, angry. Paciano Falashi. The floor manager was barreling toward the booth like a bull spotting red. He was a thick-shouldered man in his 50s, bald except for a greasy ring of hair above his ears, his face perpetually flushed like he was one bad shift away from a heart attack. He'd been managing Café Maravilla for 8 years, and in that time he'd perfected the art of making everyone beneath him feel it. "Excuse me," Paciano barked, his voice cutting through the diner's noise like a cleaver. "That booth is for paying customers." The girl flinched. Hannah saw her shrink back into the cracked vinyl, her bear pressed against her chest like a shield. "She's waiting for someone," Hannah said, rising to her feet but keeping her voice calm. "She's not bothering anyone." Paciano's face darkened. He'd been on edge all week, ever since corporate sent down new quotas and he started taking it out on the staff. "I don't recall asking for your opinion, Hannah." He turned to the girl, his voice loud enough that the tables around them went quiet. "You need to leave, now. If you're not ordering, you're loitering, and I don't run a daycare." The girl's chin began to tremble. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't move, frozen in fear. Hannah stepped between them. "She's a child, Paciano," Hannah said, her voice steady but firm. "Not a problem. Look at her. She's scared. Someone's clearly supposed to pick her up. There's no reason to." "There's every reason," Paciano hissed, leaning closer so only Hannah could hear the venom in his voice. "Do you know how many health code violations an unaccompanied minor is? Do you know what kind of liability that is? I don't care if she's scared. She's out. She's not going anywhere." Hannah's voice was quiet, but it landed like a slap. Paciano's eyes narrowed. "What did you just say to me?" "I said she's staying, and if you want to throw her out, you'll have to go through me first." The diner had gone completely silent now. Forks hovered midair. Conversations died. Every eye in the room turned toward booth 3. Paciano's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "You're done, Hannah, you hear me? Done. Get your things and... or what?" The voice came from behind them, low, cold, and sharp as a blade drawn in the dark. The entire diner went silent. Not the natural quiet of a lull in conversation, but the sudden, suffocating silence that happens when every person in a room realizes that something dangerous has just walked in. Hana turned. The man standing 10 feet away looked like he'd stepped out of a different world entirely. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with jet black hair slicked back from a face that was handsome in the way that predators are beautiful, sharp, symmetrical, and utterly without warmth. His suit was charcoal gray and fit him like it had been tailored on his body, and his eyes, the same deep, unsettling brown as the girl's, swept across the scene with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. Just above his collar, barely visible, was the coiled edge of a tattoo, a serpent's head, its mouth open, fangs bared. Behind him, 2 men in dark suits flanked the doorway like sentries. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them blinked. "Mr. Mancini," Pacciano stammered, and Hana watched every ounce of color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. I didn't realize, clearly." Nicola Mancini walked forward with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no, or if he had, never listening. He moved past Hana without looking at her, but she felt the air shift as he passed, cold and electric. He stopped at the booth and placed one hand, large, ringed, steady, on the girl's shoulder. "She's with me." The girl, Camilla, Hana would learn later, looked up at her father with those same serious, haunted eyes. But she didn't smile, didn't relax. If anything, she seemed to pull further into herself. "Of course," Pacciano said, his voice climbing an octave. "Of course, Mr. Mancini. I apologize for the confusion. If I'd known she was your daughter, I would never have—" "You'd have what?" Nicola's voice was still quiet, but now it carried an edge that made every survival instinct in Hana's body scream at her to back away. "Treated her like a human being?" Nicola continued, his eyes still on Camilla. "That shouldn't be conditional." "No, sir. Absolutely not, sir." Nicola finally looked at Hana. She felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing, heavy, searching, absolute. He studied her face for a long moment, the flour smudge on her cheek, the coffee stain on her apron, the flyaway strands of dark hair escaping from her ponytail. His gaze didn't waver. "You," he said. Hana's throat went dry. "Sir?" "You defended her." It wasn't a question, but Hana nodded anyway. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Something shifted in Nicola's expression, too fast for Hana to name. Not anger. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like surprise. Then Camilla did something no one expected. She slid out of the booth, walked past her father's outstretched hand, and stood next to Hana instead. Her small fingers reached out and grabbed the edge of Hana's apron, holding on like it was a lifeline. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Nicola Mancini looked at his daughter, his own flesh and blood, hiding behind a waitress instead of coming to him, and Hana saw something crack in that carefully controlled mask. Not anger, something far more painful than that. "Camilla," he said softly, and for the first time his voice carried something other than ice. "Come here, sweetheart." The girl didn't move. "It's okay," Hana murmured gently, touching Camilla's shoulder. "You should go with your dad." Camilla looked up at her with eyes that held far too much sadness for a 10-year-old. Slowly, reluctantly, she walked back to her father, but she kept glancing back at Hana. Nicola noticed. He noticed everything. "Pacciano," Nicola said, his eyes still on his daughter. "You're going to apologize to Camilla." "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." Pacciano practically tripped over himself. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to scare you. And to her." Pacciano blinked. "Sir?" The waitress. Apologized to her as well. Hana felt every eye in the diner turn toward her. "That's not necessary," Hana said quickly. "Really, It is," Nicola said, and the finality in his voice left no room for argument. Paciano's jaw clenched so tight, Hana could hear his teeth grind. But he turned to her, his eyes full of venom, barely hidden beneath a mask of forced civility. "I apologize for my tone." The words were hollow, bitter, forced, but Nicola nodded once. He guided Camilla back to the booth, and one of his men immediately appeared with menus, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. As Hana turned to leave, she heard Camilla whisper something to her father, soft, almost inaudible. She couldn't make out the words, but she heard his response clearly. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Hana walked back toward the kitchen, her hands trembling, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel Nicola Mancini's eyes on her back, steady, unblinking, calculating, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed, though she had no idea what, or how much it would cost her. The call came at 9:52 p.m., just as Hana was counting her tips in the employee break room. "Hana, manager's office, now." She looked up to find Linda, the night supervisor, standing in the doorway with an expression that told her everything she needed to know. The other servers, Marcy, Devin, Sam, suddenly became very interested in their phones. None of them would meet her eyes. Her stomach dropped. The walk down the narrow hallway felt like a death march. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Her sneakers squeaked on the scuffed linoleum. Through the small window in Paciano's office door, she could see him sitting behind the desk, arms folded, and beside him, a woman in a steel gray suit she'd never seen before. Hana's hand hovered over the doorknob. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know what came after. Hana's hand hovered over the doorknob for only a second before she pushed it open. The office was small and cramped, barely large enough for the metal desk, 2 folding chairs, and a filing cabinet that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Paciano sat behind the desk, with his arms folded, his expression smug in a way that made Hana's stomach turn. Beside him, perched on the edge of the second chair, was a woman in a steel gray suit, mid-40s, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, and a leather portfolio open on her lap. She didn't smile when Hana entered. She didn't even look up. "Sit down, Miss Lee," the woman said, her voice clipped and businesslike. Hana sat. The chair was cold, and one of its legs was shorter than the others, making her feel off balance. "I'm Karen Voss, Human Resources Director for Maravilla Restaurant Group," the woman continued, finally meeting Hana's eyes with the kind of detached professionalism that came from delivering bad news for a living. "I've been brought in to discuss an incident that occurred earlier today involving insubordination and workplace disruption." "Insubordination?" Hana's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I was protecting a child from being..." "You defied a direct order from your manager," Paciano cut in, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "In front of customers, you undermined my authority and created a hostile work environment." Hana stared at him. "A hostile work environment?" "You were screaming at a 10-year-old girl." "I was enforcing restaurant policy," Paciano said coldly. "Something you clearly have no respect for." Karen held up one hand, silencing them both. She flipped through the pages in her portfolio with the detached efficiency of someone checking off boxes. "According to Mr. Fallacy's report, you were verbally combative, refused to follow instructions, and interfered with his management of the dining room." "That's not what happened," Hana said, her hands clenching in her lap. "There was a scared little girl sitting alone, and he was going to throw her out. Your tenant intentions are not the issue, Miss Lee." Karen's tone was flat, final. "Your actions are. You openly challenged your supervisor in a public setting. That constitutes grounds for immediate termination." The words hit like a punch to the gut. You're firing me?" "Effective immediately," Karen said, already closing her portfolio. "You'll be paid through the end of your shift today. Your final check will be mailed within 2 weeks." "This is, insane," Hana said, her voice rising. "I did the right thing." You did the insubordinate thing, Paciano said, leaning back in his chair with barely concealed glee. And now you're done. Karen stood, smoothing her skirt. Please collect your belongings and exit the premises within 15 minutes. Security will escort you if necessary. Hannah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to argue, to fight, but she could see it in their faces. The decision had been made before she ever walked into the room. She stood on shaking legs and walked out without another word. The break room felt like a funeral when she returned. Marcy was wiping down counters. Devin was scrolling on his phone. Sam was retying her apron strings. All of them looked up when Hannah entered and then immediately looked away. No one said a word. Hannah grabbed her jacket from her locker, stuffed her tips into her purse, and pulled out the small photo of her mother she kept taped inside the door. Her hands were trembling so badly she almost dropped it. Hannah, Marcy started, but the words died when Hannah looked at her. Don't, Hannah whispered. She walked out through the back door, past the dumpsters and the stacks of empty crates, into the narrow alley that smelled like grease and old rain. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the fluorescent light and the hum of the kitchen. And then, finally, she broke. The sob came from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd been holding it down for months, years, maybe. She pressed her back against the brick wall and slid down to the pavement, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, everything she'd worked for, every double shift and swallowed insult, every smile she'd forced for customers who didn't see her as human. It was gone. And for what? For doing the calm, right thing? She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned, until the tears stopped coming and all that was left was the hollow ache in her chest. When she finally stood, her legs felt like lead. The walk home took 20 minutes. She kept her head down, her arms wrapped around herself against the evening chill. The streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over the city, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences. She didn't notice the black sedan idling across the street. She didn't see the tinted windows or the way it crept forward, matching her pace half a block behind. Inside the car, Nicola Mancini sat in the back seat, silent and still, his eyes tracking Hannah's every step. Beside him, Camilla knelt on the leather seat, her small hand pressed flat against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "She's sad, Papa," Camilla whispered, her voice trembling. "She's crying because of me." Nicola didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his hands resting on his knees, fingers curled into loose fists. "She helped me," Camilla continued, her voice barely audible, "when no one else did, and now they hurt her." She turned to look up at her father, her wide brown eyes shimmering with tears. "Don't let them hurt her, Papa, please." Nicola's gaze remained fixed on Hannah's retreating figure, small, alone, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of a world that punished kindness. He said nothing. But in the silence, something shifted. A debt had been marked, and Nicola Mancini always paid his debts. He leaned forward and tapped twice on the partition. The driver nodded. The car pulled away into the night, disappearing like a shadow, but the seed had been planted. By morning, everything would change. Hannah woke to sunlight slicing through the gaps in her blinds, and the dull throb of a headache from crying herself to sleep. For one blissful moment, she forgot. Then reality crashed back. No job, no income. Rent due in 12 days. She lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling of her studio apartment, listening to the muffled argument from the unit next door and the distant wail of sirens. Her phone sat on the nightstand. Silent. No missed calls. No texts. The world had moved on without her. She forced herself out of bed and shuffled to the kitchen, a narrow galley with a 2-burner stove and a refrigerator that hummed too loud. She filled the kettle for tea she couldn't afford to replace and stood there, numb, while the water heated. That's when she heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, precise, deliberate. Hannah froze. No one knocked on her door at 8:47 on a Thursday morning. Not the landlord, not neighbors, not friends. She didn't have any close enough for that. She moved to the door slowly, her heart picking up speed. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a black suit, hands clasped in front of him, standing perfectly still. He was young, maybe 30, with slicked back hair and the kind of posture that came from military training or something worse. "Miss Hannah Lee?" he said, his voice muffled but clear through the door. Her mouth went dry. "Who's asking?" "I have a delivery for you. From Saum. Mr. Mancini." The name hit her like ice water. Her hand trembled as she unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open, the chain still latched. The man didn't smile. He simply reached into his jacket, Hannah flinched, and pulled out a Kaume cream-colored envelope, thick and expensive-looking, sealed with dark red wax. Pressed into the wax was a symbol she didn't recognize, an ornate tigre surrounded by laurel leaves. "Mr. Mancini asked that this be delivered personally," the man said, extending the envelope through the gap. "He expects a response by noon." Hannah took it with shaking hands. The man nodded once, turned on his heel, and walked away. No explanation, no goodbye. She watched through the peephole as he disappeared down the stairwell, his footsteps silent despite the concrete steps. She locked the door and stared at the envelope. The wax seal felt warm beneath her thumb. She broke it carefully and pulled out 2 items, a folded letter on heavy cardstock, and beneath it, a handwritten note on smaller stationery. The letter was typed, formal, terrifying. Mancini Enterprises. Offer of employment. Position: Internal Operations Assistant. Department: Hospitality and Acquisitions. Salary: $68,000 annually, plus benefits. Start date: Monday, 9:00 a.m. Please report to Mancini Tower, 14th floor. Your acceptance is anticipated, $68,000. Hannah's legs went weak. She'd made $22,000 last year, barely. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the smaller note. The handwriting was sharp, controlled, written in black ink. "People who protect my daughter protect my name. N. Mancini." She read it 3 times. Then she sat down hard on the edge of her bed, her mind racing. This was insane. This was dangerous. Nicola Mancini wasn't a businessman. He was a criminal. Everyone knew it, even if no one said it out loud. And now he wanted her inside his organization? Why? Because she'd defended his daughter? Or because she knew too much? Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She stared at it for 5 rings before answering. "Miss Lee." The voice was smooth, familiar, and cold. Nicola Mancini. "Did you receive my offer?" Yes, she stammered. "But I don't understand why." "You stood up when no one else did. That's rare. Loyalty, real loyalty, is even rarer." He paused. "I need someone like that close to me. I'm not qualified for... You have a business degree and a spine. That's more than most of the people on my payroll." His tone softened, just slightly. "You'll be safe, Miss Lee. You have my word." "And if I say no?" Silence. Then, "You're free to refuse, but I don't think you will." The line went dead. Hannah stood outside Mancini Tower, at 8:53 a.m. on Monday, staring up at the gleaming glass facade that stretched 30 floors into the sky. The lobby was all marble and gold. Polished floors that reflected the chandeliers overhead, modern art on the walls, and a reception desk staffed by 2 women in tailored suits who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. Security guards in dark uniforms stood at every entrance, earpieces in, eyes scanning. Hannah gave her name. One of the receptionists made a call, then gestured toward the elevators. 14th floor. Mr. Mancini is expecting you." The elevator ride felt like descending into deep water, quiet, pressurized, suffocating. When the doors opened, she stepped into a hall lined with dark wood paneling and soft lighting. An assistant in a charcoal dress greeted her and led her to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was Nicola Mancini. He turned as she entered. He looked different in daylight, still dangerous, still powerful, but somehow more human. He wore a black suit, no tie, his collar open just enough to reveal the edge of that serpent tattoo. His expression was unreadable. "Miss Lee," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." "I didn't think I had a choice," she said before she could stop herself. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "You always have a choice. You just made the smart one." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. "You'll work directly under me," he continued, "reviewing operations, managing communications, ensuring things run cleanly. You'll see things most people don't. You'll hear things that can't leave this building." "And if I can't handle it?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Nicola's gaze held hers. "Then I'll know I was wrong about you." He extended his hand. Hannah looked at it, strong, ringed, stained with a world she didn't understand. She shook it and stepped into the darkness. The first week, Hannah learned to watch. She sat in on meetings where men in expensive suits discussed acquisitions and territory expansion in voices too quiet for the words to be innocent. She reviewed financial reports for restaurants that made twice their documented revenue and nightclubs, where the VIP lists read like a criminal registry. She filed contracts with clauses written in language so deliberately vague they could mean anything or nothing, and through it all, Nicola Mancini moved like a shadow king. In the boardroom, he was ice, cold, calculating, absolute. When a restaurant manager tried to explain away missing inventory, Nicola listened without expression, then said simply, "You have until Friday to return what you stole, or I'll take it from your family." The man went pale and stumbled out of the office. But that same afternoon, Hannah watched through the glass wall of his office as Nicola knelt on the floor, helping Shalgesom. Camilla Belze built a tower out of wooden blocks. When it collapsed, the little girl laughed, a sound so rare and bright it made Nicola smile in a way Hannah had never seen. Soft, unguarded, human. "He's different from her," said a voice behind Hannah. She turned to find Shamisi. Lucia. Nicola's executive assistant, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "She's the only soft part of him left," Lucia continued quietly. "After his wife died, he became this." She gestured toward the office. "But Camilla keeps a piece of him alive." "What happened to her mother?" Hannah asked carefully. Lucia's expression darkened. "Car accident, 3 years ago." She paused. "Though some say accidents don't just happen in this family." Before Hannah could respond, Lucia walked away, leaving the words hanging like smoke. By the second week, Camilla began seeking Hannah out. It started small, a shy wave when Hannah arrived in the morning, a stuffed bear left on her desk with a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands. Then, one afternoon, Camilla appeared in the doorway of the small office Hannah had been given, clutching a book. "Will you read to me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hannah's heart cracked. "Of course, sweetheart." They sat together on the leather couch, and Hannah read about brave princesses and clever foxes, while Camilla leaned against her shoulder. When Nicola appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, he stopped, frozen, watching them with an expression Hannah couldn't name. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, silent, until Camilla noticed him and smiled. "Papa, Hannah does all the voices." "I heard," Nicola said softly. His eyes met Hannah's over his daughter's head, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. "Thank you," his gaze seemed to say. That evening, Hannah worked late, reviewing discrepancies in payroll reports. The office was nearly empty, just the hum of computers and the distant murmur of cleaning staff. She was filing documents in the records room when she heard voices drifting from the hallway. Paciano was sloppy, a man said, his tone smooth and cold, but he served his purpose. You think Mancini suspected? Another voice asked. Nicola suspects everything, but he's distracted between the girl and now this new pet he's brought in. Hannah's breath caught. She pressed herself against the filing cabinet, hidden behind a half-open door. The waitress? The second voice scoffed. She won't last a month. Maybe not. But she's asking questions, poking around financials she shouldn't be looking at. If she finds the right thread, then we cut it. Footsteps approached. Hannah's heart was hammered. She held her breath as two figures passed the doorway, one of them tall, silver-haired, wearing a tailored navy suit. Rocco Bellini. Nicola's consigliere, his second-in-command, the man who'd been at Nicola's side in every meeting. The man everyone deferred to when Nicola wasn't in the room. The man who'd just implied she was a loose thread. The next morning, Rocco stopped by her office. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his smile polite and empty. Miss Lee, settling in well, I hope. Yes, thank you, Hannah said carefully, keeping her voice even. Good. His eyes drifted to the open files on her desk, the payroll reports she'd been reviewing. I see you're thorough. Nicola appreciates attention to detail. I try to do my job well. Of course. He stepped into the office, closing the distance. But sometimes, Miss Lee, it's wise to remember that not every door needs opening. Some things are better left, filed away. His tone was pleasant. His eyes were not. I'll keep that in mind, Hannah said, meeting his gaze. Rocco smiled, cold, reptilian. I'm sure you will. He left, but the air felt heavier, like the room had been marked. That afternoon, Nicola summoned her to his office. He was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Rocco spoke to you today. It wasn't a question. Yes, Hannah admitted. What did he say? She hesitated. That some doors are better left closed. Nicola turned to face her, his jaw tight. He's warning you. I know. Nicola studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chair. She sat. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one across the desk toward her. Hannah didn't drink it, just held it, feeling the weight of the crystal. In this life, Nicola said quietly, truth can be fatal. It gets people killed. Good people, innocent people. But lies? He took a slow sip. Lies rot you slower. From the inside out, until you don't recognize what you've become. His eyes locked on hers. I brought you here because I needed someone I could trust. Someone who wasn't already rotted. But if you stay, Hannah, you need to understand. Danger doesn't announce itself. It smiles. It shakes your hand. And it waits. Hannah's throat tightened. Are you telling me to leave? Nicola's expression softened, just slightly. I'm telling you to be careful who you trust. Even me, his eyes seemed to add. The office had long since emptied, the city outside painted in midnight rain. Hannah sat beneath the sterile glow of her desk lamp, scrolling through ledgers that didn't add up. A week earlier, Nicola had tasked her with reviewing the accounts for Hem Ristorante Verona, one of the Mancini Group's flagship establishments. What began as routine reconciliation turned into something foul the deeper she dug. Line by line, her trained eye picked apart falsified invoices, identical handwriting, duplicate signatures, vendors that didn't exist. Someone had been funneling money out through phantom suppliers, and the losses weren't small. Her stomach tightened when she noticed a familiar name attached to one of the transfers. Paciano Falasci. Paciano. The man who had humiliated a child for sitting in a diner booth. He shouldn't even have access to these records. Yet there it was. Authorization codes tied to his old credentials, still active inside the Mancini network. Worse, the approval chain traced higher to Rocco Bellini. She sat back, pulse quickening. Rocco had always been polite in the way predators were. Controlled, watchful, smiling too easily. He had Nicola's trust, maybe even his ear. But Hannah had seen the look Rocco gave her once, the one that said, "You're not one of us. You'll never be." She opened another document. Payments routed to a shell company in Milan. The company's listed director, A. Salerno. Her breath hitched. Alessio Salerno, Nicola's oldest rival. The man who'd once tried to kidnap Camilla when she was 5. This wasn't just theft, it was betrayal. Hannah began printing the records, page after page. The hum of the printer echoed like gunfire in the quiet office. She packed everything into a folder marked "Urgent" for Mr. Mancini. She never made it to his office. The door slammed open. 2 of Nicola's guards entered, stone-faced. One of them, Franco, looked almost apologetic. "Miss Lee," he said quietly, "you need to come with us." Hannah froze. "What's going on?" "Mr. Mancini wants a word." They led her down the hallway, through a security door she'd never been through before. At the end was a windowless room with a single chair and a table. A laptop sat open, displaying something that made her heart drop. A series of emails, her name in the "from" line, sent directly to Salerno Holdings. What is this?" she whispered. Rocco Bellini stepped from the shadows. His expression was calm, almost sympathetic. "It's strange, isn't it? You try to do good here, and somehow you're caught sending confidential reports to our enemies. Very disappointing." "I didn't send those," Hannah said, her voice trembling. "Those are fabricated." He sighed, closing the laptop. "You think Nicola will believe that? You've been with us, what? 3 months? You're a convenient story." A bleeding heart waitress suddenly working in finance? It's almost poetic. He turned toward the guards. "Take her to the safe house. Nicola will decide what to do with her." As they dragged her out, Hannah shouted, "Rocco, you're the one stealing from him. I have proof." Rocco's smirk didn't falter. "Then you'd better pray he finds it before I find you." The safe house smelled of dust and old cigarettes. The guards left her locked inside a small room with concrete walls and a single light bulb. Time blurred. Minutes? Hours? She couldn't tell. Her mind kept replaying Nicola's warning. In this life, truth can be fatal. But lies, they rot you slower. Now she understood what he meant. She dozed off at some point, jerking awake to the sound of the door opening. It wasn't the guards this time, it was Nicola himself. He stood there in a dark overcoat, rain glistening on his shoulders, eyes unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he set a folder down on the table. It was her personnel file, her bank statements, even her phone logs. "You've been accused of leaking internal data to Alessio Salerno," he said evenly. "You want to tell me why?" Hannah met his gaze, forcing her voice steady. "Because it's not true. Someone's laundering money through your restaurants, Rocco and Pacciano. They used me as a cover because I noticed." Nicola's eyes flickered, but his face remained carved in stone. "Do you have proof?" "I did," she said bitterly, "until they took it." He studied her, the silence stretching like wire between them. "If you're lying," he said at last, "you know what happens." "I know," Hannah replied, "but if I'm telling the truth, you're being robbed by the man sitting closest to you." Nicola turned toward the door. "You'll stay here until I decide." As he stepped out, he paused, just for a breath, and said quietly without looking back, "Even me," his eyes seemed to add. Hours later, outside in the corridor, Camilla waited, her face pale and wet from crying. "Papa," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "She saved me once. Don't let them hurt her now." Nicola didn't answer. His jaw worked, muscles tight with conflict. He brushed a hand over his daughter's hair and looked through the glass at the woman inside, the same one who'd risked everything for a frightened child. In the silence, something inside him shifted again. Not mercy yet, but doubt. And for the first time in years, Nicola Mancini didn't know who in his empire he could still trust. The safe house was a penthouse in the financial district. All glass and steel, beautiful and suffocating. Hannah had been there for 36 hours, under guard, with nothing but her thoughts and the city lights stretching endlessly below. 2 men in dark suits stood outside her door. They brought her meals. They didn't speak. She was a prisoner in everything but name. On the second morning, she asked to see Nicola. The guard, a broad-shouldered man with a scar through his eyebrow, looked at her like she'd asked to see God. "Mr. Mancini is busy." "Tell him I can prove I didn't betray him," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "Tell him I know who did." The guard hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. She heard the low murmur of a phone call. 5 minutes later, the door opened. "Get your things," the guard said. "You're going to headquarters." Nicola's office felt colder than Hannah remembered. He sat behind his desk, hands steepled in front of him, his expression carved from stone. Rocco Bellini stood to his right, arms folded, watching Hannah with the kind of predatory patience that made her skin crawl. 2 other men, enforcers, she assumed, flanked the door behind her. Nicola didn't stand when she entered, didn't speak. The silence was a weapon. "You wanted to talk," he said finally, his voice flat. "Talk." Hannah swallowed hard and placed a flash drive on the desk. "I didn't contact the Salerno family," she said. "I didn't leak intel. I didn't betray you." She met Nicola's eyes. "But someone did, and they framed me to cover their tracks," Rocco scoffed. "Convenient story." "It's the truth," Hannah said, her voice sharpening, "and I can prove it." Nicola's gaze didn't waver. "Show me." Hannah moved to the laptop on the side table, her hands trembling only slightly as she plugged in the drive. She pulled up spreadsheets, transaction records, scanned invoices, all of the documents she'd been piecing together over the past month. "These are payroll records from your restaurant division," she began, her voice growing steadier as she fell into the rhythm of analysis. The one thing she knew she was good at. "Notice the vendor payments here. Bellissimo Supplies, Adriatic Imports, Coastal Distribution, all registered to P.O. boxes, all receiving payments of $15,000 to $30,000 per month." She clicked to another screen. "But when you cross-reference these vendors with state business registries, they don't exist. The signatures on the contracts?" She zoomed in. "Digitally cloned. Look at the timestamp metadata. Same second, same pixel depth. Forged." Rocco shifted his weight. "This is absurd. You're grasping at—" "Let her finish," Nicola said quietly, his eyes never leaving the screen. Hannah pulled up a video file. "This is security footage from your flagship restaurant 3 weeks ago. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m. The grainy image showed a man in a server's uniform, Paciano Nedzi, meeting someone in the back alley. Money changed hands. The other figure turned just enough for the camera to catch his face. "Rocco Bellini." The room went silent. "Paciano worked for you," Hannah said, turning to Rocco. "He was your inside man. You've been bleeding Nicola's empire for years, funneling money through fake vendors, skimming profits. And when I started asking questions, you framed me." Rocco's jaw tightened, but his expression remained calm. "Nicola, you're going to believe her? A waitress you've known for a month?" "I'm going to believe the Shannon evidence," Nicola said, his voice dangerously soft. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Marco, forensics team, my office, now. I need every file on this drive verified, signatures, metadata, timestamps, everything." He hung up and looked at Rocco. If she's lying, she's dead. If she's not, his eyes went cold. You are. 40 minutes later. Marco Delacroix, a wiry man with glasses and the intensity of someone who lived in code, looked up from his laptop. It's authentic, boss, he said quietly. The signatures are cloned, the vendors are shells. The timestamps match financial transfers to an offshore account registered under a holding company. The beneficial owner? He paused. Rocco Bellini. The air in the room turned to ice. Nicola stood slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate. He walked around the desk and stopped in front of Rocco, his voice barely above a whisper. You stole from me. You used my name to line your pockets. And when someone got close to the truth, you tried to kill her reputation, maybe her life. Rocco's mask finally cracked. Nicola, listen. I'm done listening. Nicola turned to Hannah. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're not my enemy, Miss Lee. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. You're my pioneer reckoning. He turned back to his men. Lock Rocco in the sublevel. No calls, no visitors. 2 enforcers moved forward. Rocco didn't resist. He knew better, but his eyes burned with fury as they escorted him out. When the door closed, Nicola exhaled slowly and looked at Hannah. You just saved your life, he said, and maybe mine. What happens now? Hannah asked. Nicola walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. Now, I call a family meeting. His reflection smiled, cold, sharp, lethal. And I find out who else has been rotting my empire from the inside. He pulled out his phone and began texting. Hannah's pulse quickened. She didn't know what a family meeting meant in Nicola Mancini's world, but she had a feeling blood would be spilled before it was over. The fog rolled in heavy and low, swallowing the dockyard in silver mist. The air tasted like metal and gasoline. Headlights cut through the haze as black sedans lined up outside the abandoned Ravenna warehouse, a place once used to move contraband, now chosen for judgment. Hannah sat in the back seat beside Nicola. He hadn't spoken since the convoy left the mansion. The silence between them was thick with the weight of everything unsaid. She clasped the folder in her lap, her final piece of truth. Beside her, Nicola's expression was unreadable, the mask of a man preparing for war. When the door opened, cold air swept in. They stepped into the cavernous building, boots echoing against the concrete. Rows of men lined the walls, Nicola's soldiers. At the center stood Del Rocco Bellini and Pacciano Fallaci, faces smug and confident. Rocco smiled thinly. Boss, you didn't have to bring her. I already took care of your problem. Nicola didn't respond. He walked forward slowly, his presence alone enough to make grown men shrink. Hannah followed, her heart hammering. You said she betrayed you, Nicola said quietly. That she sold us out to Salerno. Rocco spread his hands. The evidence doesn't lie. Hannah stepped forward before Nicola could speak. It does when you write it yourself. A murmur rippled through the men. Rocco's eyes narrowed. You should have stayed quiet, sweetheart. This isn't your world. No, she said, voice shaking but steady. It's yours, the one you've been poisoning behind his back. She placed the folder on a nearby crate and flipped it open. A projector whirred to life. The first slide illuminated a ledger, identical entries from restaurants across the city, signed by Pacciano. Next came photos. Pacciano meeting Salerno's courier behind a club. Rocco's signature approving payments to shell companies. Then came the final clip. Grainy security footage of Rocco shaking hands with Alessio Salerno. Money exchanged. Rocco's voice, captured clearly. By the time Mancini figures it out, he'll be a relic. We'll split his empire before the year ends. Gasps broke out. Rocco's smirk cracked. That's not possible, he muttered, eyes darting to Pacciano. Nicola's voice sliced through the chaos. You tried to destroy my family, he said coldly. You forgot what loyalty costs. Rocco's hand twitched toward his jacket. Paciano panicked first. He drew his gun and aimed at Hana, but Nicola's guards were faster. The sound of gunfire thundered through the warehouse. Paciano fell before he could fire a single shot. Rocco stumbled back, staring at the blood spreading across the floor. "Nicola, listen!" "No," Nicola said. "You listened to greed." He leveled his pistol, but didn't pull the trigger. The gun trembled slightly, not from fear, but restraint. "You're not worth the bullet," he turned to Hana. His gaze softened just enough to ask without words, "What should I do?" The silence hung between them, broken only by the hum of the projector, still showing Rocco's betrayal. Hana swallowed hard. "Justice," she said quietly. "Not revenge." Nicola lowered the gun. He nodded to his men. "Get him out of my sight. Alive." 2 guards seized Rocco, dragging him toward the waiting cars. He didn't resist. His power, his arrogance, everything gone. When the last of the cars left, Nicola stood motionless, watching the fog reclaim the warehouse. Hana stepped closer. "You spared him," she said. He exhaled slowly. "I spared myself." For a long time, they stood there in silence. The echoes of violence still clung to the air, but something had shifted, something irreversible. Nicola turned to her, eyes no longer hard, but human. "You've done more for this family than anyone born into it." "I didn't do it for your family," Hana said softly. "I did it for the girl who deserved better than the world you built." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Maybe that's why I need you near it." Outside, dawn began to break through the mist, pale gold cutting through gray. The Mancini convoy rolled out, the old empire behind them burning quietly into the sea air. Inside the car, Nicola said one final thing as the city lights reappeared through the fog. "You showed me that power means nothing without conscience. From now on, we will build something different." Hana looked out the window as the docks vanished behind them. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. Whatever Nicola Mancini became next, it wouldn't be born from fear. Still, the scent of blood lingered on the wind, a reminder that redemption always demanded a price. 6 months later. The bell above the door chimed, a bright, clear sound that carried through the warm afternoon air. Hana looked up from behind the counter, where she'd been arranging fresh pastries in the display case, and felt her heart lift. Camilla Tsai burst through the door first, her dark curls bouncing. Her face lit with a smile so bright it could have powered the city. Gone was the frightened, silent girl from the corner booth. In her place was a child who laughed freely, who ran without looking over her shoulder, who wore her joy like armor. "Hana!" Camilla called, racing across the black and white checkered floor. Hana barely had time to wipe her hands on her apron before Camilla crashed into her, wrapping small arms around her waist in a hug that was all warmth and trust. "Hey, sweetheart," Hana said softly, kneeling down to eye level. "I missed you." "I missed you more," Camilla said solemnly. Then she grinned. "Papa said we could come every Saturday now." "Did he?" Hana looked up. Nicola Mancini stood in the doorway, hands in the pockets of his dark slacks, wearing a simple black shirt open at the collar. No suit today. No guards flanking him, just a father taking his daughter out for lunch. He looked softer somehow, still dangerous. That would never fully leave him, but the sharp edges had been dulled. The ice in his eyes had thawed, just slightly. "Every Saturday," he confirmed, stepping inside. His gaze swept across the cafe. The red vinyl booths now repaired and gleaming, the walls painted a warm cream, sunlight streaming through clean windows. "If the owner doesn't mind," Hana smiled. "I think she can make room." Cafe Maravilla had reopened 2 months ago, under new ownership. Hana's name was on the deed, but everyone knew who'd financed it. Nicola had made the offer one quiet evening in his office, sliding the paperwork across the desk without fanfare. You deserve to build something that can't be taken from you, he'd said simply. She'd tried to refuse. He'd insisted. Eventually, she'd stopped arguing and started dreaming. Now the cafe was hers. Every polished table, every cup of coffee, every smile she earned honestly. It wasn't just a business. It was proof that kindness could survive in a world built on cruelty. Camilla claimed her usual spot, the same corner booth by the window, though now it held crayons and coloring books instead of fear. Nicola slid into the seat across from her, and Hannah brought over 2 menus, though she already knew what they'd order. Hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, she said to Camilla. And whipped cream? Obviously, Camilla giggled. Hannah turned to Nicola. And for you? Coffee, black? He paused. And whatever she's having. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Hot chocolate? Why not? Nicola said, and the corner of his mouth lifted in something close to a real smile. Camilla's eyes went wide. Papa, you hate sweet things. Maybe I'm trying something new, he said quietly, his gaze drifting to Hannah. She felt the weight of it, gratitude, respect, something warmer she wasn't ready to name. Coming right up, she said, retreating to the counter before her face could give anything away. 20 minutes later, after Camilla had devoured a grilled cheese and started coloring a picture of a castle, Nicola rose and walked to the counter where Hannah was restocking napkins. He sat on one of the stools, looking oddly out of place in the humble diner, like a wolf trying to pretend he belonged among sheep. She's happy, Hannah said softly, glancing at Camilla, really happy. Because of you, Nicola said. Because of us, Hannah corrected. You chose to change, Nicola. That wasn't me. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. You changed more than my business, he admitted, his voice low. You changed what I thought I was. He looked up, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression. I thought being strong meant being feared. That protecting my family meant building walls no one could climb. But you, he shook his head. You walked into my world with nothing but compassion and showed me that strength looks different than I thought. Hannah's throat tightened. You did the hard part. You tore down your own empire to rebuild it the right way. And lost half my organization in the process, he said with a bitter smile. But keep your soul. Nicola held her gaze. Some days, I'm not sure it was worth it. Ask Camilla, Hannah said gently. As if summoned, Camilla appeared between them, tugging at both their hands. Her face was bright, hopeful, unburdened. Can we stay this time? She asked, looking between them. Not just for lunch. Can we stay longer? Hannah's heart cracked open. Nicola looked down at his daughter, then at Hannah, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. Yeah, sweetheart, he said softly. We can stay. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in gold, Hannah poured fresh coffee for Nicola. The cafe was quiet now, just the 3 of them, the soft clink of dishes, and the distant hum of the city beyond. Nicola accepted the cup, his fingers brushing hers for just a moment. Thank you, he said. Not for the coffee. Hannah smiled. You're my best customer. Camilla giggled, coloring happily in her booth, safe and loved. And in that moment, small, ordinary, perfect, Hannah understood what she'd really saved. Not just a child, not just a man, but the possibility that even in the darkest places, light could take root and grow. The girl who'd defied power to protect the innocent had done more than survive. She'd redeemed an empire built on silence, and in doing so, she'd found her own redemption too.